Okay, so yeah, okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to the last live session of the series of problems from this course, RNA Biology. So, my name is Oishi, and I'm a PMR research scholar from the Department of Chemistry, IIT Bombay. And this is the 13th live session of this course. So, as you know, if you have been attending the previous live sessions, you know that what we do in these live sessions is that basically discuss some of the previous year assignment problems, and we not only discuss the problems but we also discuss the solutions to those problems, and we try to discuss the concept behind those problems so it's easier for us to solve similar type of other problems, right? So today is the last class, extra class, and it will be of 1 hour. So we'll start today's class. As you know, these sessions are pretty interactive. We try to keep it pretty interactive. That is the basic agenda. So if you have any doubts, you can stop me in between. You can unmute your mic and let me know, or you can type in the chat box and we can discuss it further. Okay. So moving on to the first question for today. Adequate vitamin C in diet ensures longer telomere length. True or false? So I'll give you a few minutes to ponder upon this question, and if you know the answer, you can let me know, or you can write in the chat box. You can take a few minutes to think about it, and after that, we'll start discussing the solution. Okay, so the correct answer will be true. Okay. So, what is the basic correlation between these two things? So, telomeres I've already talked about a lot in my previous classes. Still, a bit of a recap. What are they? Why are they important? Telomere shortening and the end replication problem. Telomere is telomere hypothesis of aging. So, these are the ends of linear chromosomes basically. If you can see over here, let me just put it in laser pointer mode. Yeah, so it's a basically repetitive DNA sequence. TTAGGT in vertebrates, specialized proteins form a capped end structure. Okay, so the telomere cap chromosome ends, if you can see, this has been visualized by fluorescence microscopy. This is a telomere structure. Now, why telomere is important? Telomeres allow cells to distinguish chromosomes ends from broken DNA, right? So homologous recombination, non-homologous end joining, and all of that. So why telomere is important? Because they prevent chromosome fusions by NHEG or non-homologous end joining. Okay. So telomere can also provide a means for counting cell divisions. If you can see, the y-axis is proliferative capacity, the x-axis is the number of cell divisions. So how do cells know how many divisions they have completed? And we also know about the end replication problem. Telomere shorten with each S phase. DNA replication is bidirectional. Polymerases move 5' to 3', and it requires a labile primer. And each round of DNA replication leaves 50 to 200 base pairs DNA unreplicated at the 3' end. Now, telomere also provides a means for counting cell division. Telomere shorten with each cycle. Telomere shorten from 10 to 15 kb to 3 to 5 kb after 50 to 60 doublings. And cellular senescence is triggered when cells acquire one or a few critically short telomeres, right? So this is x-axis is number of doublings, y-axis telomere length. You can see that as cellular replicative senescence it reaches, when the number of doublings increases, the telomere length decreases. It's inversely proportional. So how do replicatively immortal cells avoid complete loss of telomeres? How do they solve the end replication problem? Okay, so enzyme reverse transcriptase with RNA and protein components. It adds a telomeric repeat DNA directly to 3' overhang, uses its own RNA as a template, and vertebrate repeat DNA on 3' and TTAGGG, telomerase RNA template AAAU CCC. Okay. Now, telomerase overcomes telomere shortening and the end replication problem. Is expressed by germ cells, early embryonic cells, not expressed by most somatic cells, may be expressed by some stem cells but highly controlled, expressed by 80 to 90% of cancer cells. Remaining still need to overcome the end replication problem, also do so by recombinational mechanisms. Okay. So you can see over here. However, cells that express telomerase still undergo senescence in response to DNA damage oncogenes. So expand cells for replacement therapies, telomerase inhibitors to selectively kill cancer cells. Now, the telomere hypothesis of aging. Telomeres shorten with each cell division and therefore with age. Short telomeres may cause cell senescence, and senescent cells may contribute to aging. True. Telomere shortening causes aging, and telomeres will prevent aging. Now, telomere length is not related to lifespan. Okay, telomeres contribute to aging only if senescent cells contribute to aging. Okay, and telomeres protects against replicative senescence, but not senescence induced by other causes. Now, summary: telomeres are essential for chromosome stability. Telomere shortening occurs owing to the biochemistry of DNA replication. Short telomeres cause replicative senescence. Other senescence causes are telomere independent. Telomeres prevents telomere shortening and replicative senescence, and the telomere hypothesis of aging depends on the cellular senescence hypothesis of aging. Now, if you talk about vitamin C, it's water-soluble vitamin that is commonly found in fruits and vegetables, right? Where does it come from? Fruits like kiwi, orange, sweet potatoes, lemons, tomatoes, strawberries, turnip greens, broccoli, red peppers, cantaloupe, white potatoes, papaya, blueberries, mango, and many others. Okay, these are all sources of vitamin C. And why do we need it? Because it helps us grow, repair broken tissue when we get hurt, make collagen, heal cuts and bones, boost immunity. And basically it acts as an antioxidant, it decreases the risk of certain conditions, it strengthens the immune system. Now, research suggests that a diet rich in vitamin C can be associated with longer telomere length. True. Potentially supporting healthy aging and longevity. Now, telomeres, protective caps on the ends of the chromosomes, shorten with age and are linked to cellular aging. So, vitamin C and telomere length studies have shown that a positive correlation between dietary vitamin C and telomere length. Greater vitamin C intake has been linked to longer telomeres in some studies. Now, vitamin C, the antioxidant properties, it's a potent antioxidant which may help protect cells from damage caused by free radicals, potentially reducing oxidative stress and supporting telomere maintenance. And in case of telomerase activity, vitamin C may also play a role in enhancing the activity of telomerase, an enzyme involved in telomere maintenance, which could contribute to longer telomeres, right? Now, if we talk about dietary patterns, diets rich in fruits and vegetables, which are good sources of vitamin C, have also been associated with longer telomeres. The Mediterranean diet, for example, which emphasizes these foods, has been linked to a reduced risk of age-related telomere shortening. And other nutrients like vitamin C is of interest. Other nutrients like vitamin E and omega-3 fatty acids have also been linked to telomere length. Now, while research suggests a link between vitamin C and telomere length, more research is needed to fully understand the mechanisms and the extent of this relationship. So, in summary, while not a definitive cure for telomere shortening, incorporating vitamin C-rich foods into your diet may be a positive step towards supporting telomere health and potentially contributing to healthy aging. Right? So, if we go into more detail, basically, like in case of if we have to read research papers and all. So there is a research paper published in 2023, sorry, association between dietary vitamin C and telomere length, a cross-sectional study, right? So if you see, they have said that currently telomere length is known to reflect the replication potential and longevity of cells, and many studies have reported that telomere length is associated with age-related diseases and biological aging. Studies have also shown that vitamin C acts as an oxidant and free radical scavenger to protect cells from oxidative stress and telomere wear, thus achieving anti-aging effects, right? So at present, there are few and incomplete studies on the relationship between vitamin C and telomere length. So this study that they have done, it basically aims to explore the relationship between vitamin C and telomere length. Right? Also, so the relationship is the topic of growing interest in aging and cellular biology, and since vitamin C or ascorbic acid is a powerful antioxidant, it helps reduce oxidative stress, one of the key factors that accelerates telomere shortening. And telomeres are more susceptible to oxidative damage because of their high guanine content, which makes antioxidants like vitamin C potentially very protective. Okay, so vitamin C also plays a role in DNA repair and the regulation of enzymes like telomerase. Some studies even suggest that adequate levels of vitamin C may support telomerase activity, which helps maintain or lengthen telomeres, especially in stem and immune cells. Several population studies have found positive correlations between higher vitamin C intake or plasma levels and longer telomere length. However, these are associational and don't really prove causation. Chronic inflammation is associated with accelerated telomere shortening. Vitamin C has anti-inflammatory effects, which might indirectly help preserve telomere length. Then, while vitamin C may help protect telomeres by reducing oxidative stress and supporting DNA repair mechanisms, more controlled clinical studies are still needed, to establish a direct causal link. So, still maintaining sufficient vitamin C through diet or supplements could be beneficial for cellular health and aging. Right? So, that is all a gist between vitamin C and telomere length, covering biological mechanisms and experimental evidence and regulations. We know that telomeres are repetitive sequence, right? Nucleotide sequence, TTA, GGG in humans at the ends of chromosomes that protect them from deterioration. So every time cell divides, telomeres shorten due to the end replication problem. So critically short telomeres can trigger cellular senescence, apoptosis, or genomic instability, hallmarks of aging and many diseases. Now, vitamin C is a water-soluble antioxidant. It neutralizes reactive oxygen species, or what we call ROS, right, which can damage DNA, proteins, and lipids. It generates other antioxidants like vitamin E. It acts as a cofactor for various enzymes involved in gene expression, collagen synthesis, and epigenetic regulation. Now, telomeres are rich in guanine, making them particularly vulnerable to ROS damage. Oxidative stress accelerates telomere attrition even more than cell replication, and studies in cell cultures and animal models show that oxidative stress hastens telomere shortening, leading to premature senescence. Now, how vitamin C may protect telomeres? Vitamin C reduces ROS levels, decreasing the oxidative burden on telomeric DNA. This helps prevent single-strand breaks and base modifications in telomeric regions. Vitamin C is a cofactor for TET enzymes, 1011 translocation methylcytosine dioxygenases, which regulate DNA demethylation, and epigenetic changes can influence telomerase expression, which helps rebuild telomeres. Vitamin C also supports the proliferation and survival of lymphocytes, which depend on telomeres for maintaining telomere length during immune responses. And chronic inflammation elevates ROS and telomere attrition. Sorry, vitamin C suppresses NF kappa B activation and pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF alpha and interleukin 6, indirectly preserving telomere integrity. And there's data from research facilities that showed that higher blood levels of vitamin C are associated with longer leukocyte telomere length. Okay. And apparently there was a study in 2015 in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition linked higher vitamin C intake to longer telomeres in women. So, and in vitro and animal studies also say that cultured human fibroblasts treated with vitamin C showed slower telomere shortening over multiple passages. And in mouse models, vitamin C supplementation improved telomere stability and extended the lifespan of certain stem cells. So, what are the limitations and considerations? So, most human data are observational and not really causal. Supplementation beyond physiological levels does not always yield added benefit. In some cases, excessive antioxidants may disrupt cellular signaling, and inter-individual variation like genetic, lifestyle, environmental affects how vitamin C influences telomere dynamics. So diets rich in vitamin C, like fruits like oranges, strawberries, kiwi, vegetables like broccoli and bell peppers may contribute to healthy aging. Maintaining sufficient vitamin C levels is particularly important for elderly individuals, people under chronic stress, and those with oxidative damage prone diseases like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc. So in conclusion, vitamin C contributes to telomere maintenance by combating oxidative stress, regulating gene expression, and supporting cellular defense mechanisms systems. So, while promising the telomere lengthening effects of vitamin C are likely modest and synergistic with other lifestyle factors like exercise, sleep, and a balanced diet. Okay, so this is basically what the question was all about, and the answer is true. Okay, so if you have any questions regarding, if you have any doubts regarding this question, you can ask me now or type in the chat box and we'll discuss about it. I'll give you a few minutes and we'll move on to the next question for today. Okay, so this was the question. So adequate vitamin C diet can ensure proper longer telomere length. So the answer was true. So moving on to the next question for today. This is the next question for today. Mutations will be detected and eliminated from cells. You can let me know if it's true or false. So these are the two options. I'll give you a few minutes to think about the question, and then maybe we can move ahead discussing the same. Okay, so the answer for this question would be true. So if you think about it, mutations could be detected and eliminated from cells, right? Okay, so while mutations can sometimes be detected by the cell's internal mechanisms and either repaired or lead to the elimination of the damaged cell, this is not always guaranteed. Okay, so for example, as we know that cells have DNA repair mechanisms such as base accession repair, nucleotide accession repair, mismatch repair, and homologous recombination, right? So these can detect and correct certain types of mutations, especially those caused by replication errors or environmental damage like UV light. Okay, now if you talk about the elimination or apoptosis of senescence, say if a mutation is severe and the damage cannot be repaired, the cell may undergo apoptosis. Okay, that is programmed cell death, or it can enter senescence, which is a permanent growth arrest. And there are protective mechanisms to prevent the spread of potentially harmful mutations, such as those leading to cancer. Now, why are there limitations? So not all mutations are recognized, right? Some mutations may occur in non-coding regions or go undetected. And cancer cells often evade these mechanisms by mutating the very genes that control repair and apoptosis, like P53 or PRB. So in some cases, cells with mutations continue to divide, which can lead to disease or cancer. So while cells can detect and remove some mutations, it is not a perfect system, and many mutations escape detection or elimination. Therefore, the statement is technically false. though partially true in specific contexts. Right? So if we go into detail, we know that the genetic variation occurs within and between populations, right? So the variation among individuals in a population is a combination of inheritable and non-heritable traits. So phenotype, the observable characteristics of an organism, is the cumulative product of an inherited phenotype and a multitude of environmental influences. Okay, like for example, butterflies are genetically identical at the loci for coloration, but they emerge at different seasons, right? So only the genetic component of variation can have evolutionary consequences as a result of natural selection. So this is because only inheritable traits pass from generation to generation. Both quantitative and discrete characters contribute to variation within a population. So quantitative characters are those that vary along a continuum within a population. For example, plant height in our wildflower population includes short and tall plants, right? And everything in between. Now, quantitative variation is usually due to polygenic inheritance, in which the additive effects of two or more genes influence a single phenotypic character. Now, discrete characters such as flower color are usually determined by a single locus with different alleles, with distinct impacts on the phenotype. And if we talk about polymorphism, which occurs when two or more discrete characters are present and noticeable in a population. The contrasting forms are called morphs, as in the red flower and the white flower morphs in our wildflower population, or the butterflies in the previous slide as I showed. So human populations are polymorphic for a variety of physical and biochemical characters. For example, freckles, or for biochemical, we have the blood types. So polymorphism applies only to discrete characters, not quantitative characters such as human height, which varies among people in a continuum. If we talk about population geneticists measure genetic variation both at the level of whole genes and at the molecular level of DNA. So gene diversity measures the average percent of gene loci that are heterozygous. So if the fruit fly, about 86% of their 13,000 gene loci are homozygous. Okay, about 14% are heterozygous. Now, nucleotide diversity measures the level of difference in nucleotide sequences, base pair differences, among individuals in a population. In fruit flies, about 1% of the bases are different between two individuals, and two individuals would differ at 1.8 million of the 180 million nucleotides in the fruit fly genome. Right? Humans have relatively little genetic variation. Gene diversity is about 14% in humans. Nucleotide diversity is only 0.1%. So, if we talk about geographic variation, for example, it results from differences in genetic structure either between populations or between subgroups of a single population that inhabit different areas. Now, often geographic variation results from natural selection that modifies gene frequencies in response to differences in local environmental factors. Alternatively, genetic drift can lead to chance variations among populations, and geographic variation can occur on a local scale within a population if the environment is patchy or if dispersal of individuals is limited, producing subpopulations. Now, geographic variation in the form of a graded change in a trait along a geographic axis is called a cline. Clines may represent intergrade zones where individuals from neighboring genetically different populations interbreed. Alternatively, clines may reflect the influence of natural selection on gradation in some environmental variable. For example, the average body size of many North American species of birds and mammals increases gradually with increasing latitude, perhaps conserving heat by decreasing the ratio of surface area to volume. Now, clines may reflect direct environmental effects on phenotype, but also genetic differences along the cline. For example, average size of yarrow plants or Anchilia, whatever the pronunciation is, they gradually decreases with increasing variation, right? So although the environment affects growth rate directly to some extent with altitude, common garden experiments have demonstrated that some of the variation has genetic basis. In contrast to clines, isolated populations typically demonstrate discrete differences. For example, populations of house mice were first introduced to the island of Madeira in century, but isolated populations developed that were separated by mountains. So some isolated populations have evolved differences in karyotypes, probably through genetic drift. Now, if you talk about the mutation and sexual recombination generate genetic variation. So new alleles originate only by mutation. Okay, so mutations are changes in the nucleotide sequence of DNA. Mutations of individual genes are rare and random, and mutations in somatic cells are lost when the individual dies. Only mutations in cell lines that produce gametes can be passed along to the offspring. Now, most point mutations, those affecting a single base of DNA, are probably harmless, and most eukaryotic DNA does not code for proteins, and mutations in these areas are likely to have little impact on phenotype. Even mutations in genes that code for proteins may lead to little effect because of redundancy in the genetic code. However, some single point mutations can have a significant impact on phenotype. Sickle cell disease is caused by a single point mutation. Now, mutations that alter the structure of a protein enough to impact its function are more likely to be harmful than beneficial. So, random change is unlikely to improve a genome that is the product of thousands of generation selection. So, rarely a mutant allele may enable an organism to fit its environment better and increase reproductive success. This is especially likely if the environment is changing, and these mutations may be beneficial now. For example, new mutations that enable HIV to resist antiviral drugs are selected under normal conditions against normal conditions, but favorable under drug treatment. So, chromosomal mutations, including rearrangements of chromosomes, affect many genes and are likely to disrupt proper development of an organism. However, occasionally these dislocations link genes together so that the phenotype is improved. So duplications of chromosome segments, whole chromosomes or sets of chromosomes are nearly always harmful. So however, when they are not harmful, the duplicates provide an expanded genome. And these extra genes can now mutate to take on new functions. Because microorganisms have very short generation times, mutation generates genetic variation rapidly. So with its RNA genome, mutation rate is higher than the DNA genome. So this combination of mutation and replication rate will generate mutations in the HIV population at every site in the genome every day. So in the face of this high mutation rate, single drug treatments are unlikely to be effective for very long, and the most effective drug treatments are multiple drug cocktails. And it is far less probable that mutations against all the drugs will appear in individual viruses in a short time. So in organisms with sexual reproduction, most of the genetic differences among individuals are due to unique recombinations of the existing alleles from the population gene pool. So the ultimate origin of allelic variation is past mutations, and random segregation of homologous chromosomes and random union of gametes creates a unique assortment of alleles in each individual. So sexual reproduction recombines old alleles into fresh assortments every generation. Now, if you talk about diploidy and balanced polymorphism that preserve variation, so the tendency for natural selection to reduce variation is countered by mechanisms that preserve or restore variation, including diploidy and balanced polymorphisms. So, diploidy in eukaryotes prevents the elimination of recessive alleles by selection because they do not impact the phenotype in heterozygotes. Even recessive alleles that are unfavorable can persist in a population through their propagation by heterozygous individuals. And recessive alleles are only exposed to selection when two parents carry the same recessive allele and these are combined in one zygote. This happens only rarely when the frequency of the recessive allele is very low. And heterozygote protection maintains a huge pool of alleles that may not be suitable under the present conditions, but that could be beneficial when the environment changes. If you talk about balanced polymorphism, it maintains genetic diversity in a population by natural selection. One mechanism in balanced polymorphism is heterozygote advantage. In some situations, individuals that are heterozygous at a particular locus have greater survivorship and reproductive success than homozygotes. And in these cases, multiple alleles will be maintained at that locus by natural selection. Heterozygous advantage maintains genetic diversity at the human locus for one chain of hemoglobin. A recessive allele causes sickle cell disease in homozygous individuals. Homozygous dominant individuals are very vulnerable to malaria. Heterozygous individuals are resistant to malaria, right? Now, the frequency of the sickle cell allele is highest in areas where the malarial parasite is common. The advantages of heterozygous over homozygous recessive individuals who suffer sickle cell disease and homozygous dominant individuals who suffer malaria are greatest here. A sickle cell allele may reach 20% of the gene pool with 32% heterozygotes resistant to malaria and 4% with sickle cell disease. Now, a second mechanism promoting balanced polymorphisms is frequency-dependent selection. So, frequency-dependent selection occurs when the reproductive success of any one morph declines if the phenotype becomes too common in the population. And the relationships between parasites and their hosts often demonstrate this type of relationship. Now, hosts often vary in their defense against parasites and parasites in their ability to infect hosts. And those parasites that are capable of infecting the most common host type will increase in abundance, and the rarer host types will increase as the genetic frequencies in the parasite population will shift. And these shifts in genetic frequencies among hosts and among parasites maintain variation in both populations. So, aspects of this teeter-totter of frequency-dependent selection can be seen in the host parasite between clones of aquatic snails and a parasitic worm. So, in these snails which reproduce asexually, the most common snail clones suffer the highest infection rates than the least common clones, suggesting frequency-dependent selection. Now, some genetic variations like neutral variation have negligible impact on reproductive success. For example, the diversity of human fingerprints seems to confer no selective advantage to some individuals over others. Much of the protein and DNA variation detectable by methods like electrophoresis may be neutral in their adaptive qualities. The relative frequencies of neural variations will not be affected by natural selection. Some neutral alleles will increase and others will decrease by the chance effects of genetic drift. And there is no consensus on how much genetic variation can be classified as neutral, or even if any variation can be considered truly neutral. It is almost impossible to demonstrate that an allele brings no benefit at all to an organism. Also, variation may be neutral in one environment but not in another. So, only if a fraction of extensive variation in a gene pool significantly affects an organism, there still is an enormous reservoir of raw material for natural selection and adaptive evolution. Okay, so as we know, mutations, there are basically changes in DNA. Not all mutations are harmful and can happen in body cells and in gametes. So mutations are passed down to the offspring only when they're in the gametes, right, in the germ cell lines. Now, what are the types of mutations? The basics are substitution, insertion, deletion. So in substitution, one base is substituted for the another. In insertion, a base is added, and in deletion, a base is removed. Pretty self-explanatory. Now, what are mutagens? Factors in the environment that cause mutations can be X-rays, UV light, radiation, chemicals, smoking, sun, etc. Now, mutations are changes in DNA sequences, change to the order of ATGC, different order, different amino acid in protein, different protein structure, different protein function. So, this is what mutation is all about. Now, mutations can be single base change, can be no amino acid change, can be redundancy in code, can be missense. For example, if it's a silent mutation, basically there's no amino acid change, or there's a redundancy in code. For example, two different codons will code for the same amino acid. If there's a missense mutation, it will be change amino acid. If there's a nonsense mutation, this is changes to a stop codon. Now, point mutation can lead to sickle cell anemia. It's a very prominent, popular study where mutation can lead to a disease. So, what is the kind of mutation? If you see, this is the wild type hemoglobin DNA, right? This is CTT, and the mutant hemoglobin DNA has CAT, cytosine adenine thymine. So, the mRNA for the wild type sequence will be guanine, adenine, while for the mutant will be guanine, uracil, adenine. So, the normal hemoglobin will have really this amino acid, while the sickle cell hemoglobin will have valine. Okay, this is missense mutation. So normal red blood cells and the primary structure of normal hemoglobin is this, whereas sickle red blood cells and the primary structure of sickle cell hemoglobin is this. It's a recessive inheritance pattern. It strikes 1 out of 400 people. Now, what are mutations? Can be frame shift in the reading frame, changes everything downstream, or it can be insertion, like adding bases, right, deletions, losing bases. Where would this mutation cause the most change at beginning or ending of the gene? If you can see over here, frame shift mutation causing extensive missense, frame shift mutation causing an immediate nonsense, like it changes it to a stop codon, and insertion or deletion of 3 nucleotides, no frame shift, extra or missing amino acid. Now, so if we talk about the frame shift mutations, if there is a deletion, it will become like this, and if insertion, like this. So cystic fibrosis, which is strikes 1 in 25500 both, it's a carrier. Normal allele codes for a membrane protein that moves chloride across cell membrane, whereas mutant channel limit movement of chloride and hydrogen and water across cell membrane. It's thicker and stickier mucus coat cells, and mucus build up in the pancreas, lungs, digestive tract, and causes bacterial infections. Okay, so without treatment, children die before 5. With treatment, can live past their late 20s. Okay, so this is what cystic fibrosis is all about. Now, what are the mutation types? If you see over here, mutation is a process that produces a gene or chromosome that differs from the wild type, right? And the mutation may result due to changes either on the gene or the chromosome itself. This broadly mutation can be gene mutation where the allele of a gene changes, or chromosome mutation where the segments of a chromosome, whole chromosomes, or entire sets of chromosomes change. Now, types of mutation, there are various schemes for classification of different kinds of mutations depending on the type of cell involved. Like somatic mutations that are in the somatic tissues of the body, mutations are not transmitted to progeny. The extent of the phenotypic effect depends upon whether the mutation is dominant or recessive. Dominant mutations generally have a greater effect, and the extent of the phenotypic effect depends upon whether it occurs early or late in the development. Early arising mutations have a greater effect. Now, germinal mutations that are in the germ tissues of the body, mutations may be transmitted to progeny. Dominant mutations are seen in first generation after the mutation occurs. If a female gamete containing an X-linked mutation is fertilized, the mates will show the mutant phenotype, and the recessive mutations will only be seen upon the chance mating with an individual carrying the recessive allele too. This recessive mutation may remain hidden for many generations. If we talk about the mode of origin, spontaneous mutations occur suddenly in their nature and their origin is unknown. They are also called background mutation and have been reported in many organisms such as maize, bread molds, microorganisms like bacteria, virus, etc., Drosophila, mice, etc. Induced mutations, besides naturally occurring spontaneous mutations, the mutations can be induced artificially in the living organism by exposing them to abnormal environments such as radiation, certain physical conditions like temperature and chemicals. Now, according to their mode of direction, following types of mutations have been recognized. Forward mutation in an organism, when mutations create a change from wild type to abnormal phenotype, then that type of mutation are known as forward mutations. Most mutations are forward type. The forward mutations are often corrected by error correcting mechanisms so that an abnormal phenotype changes to a wild type phenotype. Now, according to size, following two types of mutations have been recognized. Point mutation, when heritable alterations occur in a very small segment of DNA molecule, there is a single nucleotide and nucleotide pair, then this mutation is called point mutation. And the point mutation may occur due to the following types of subnucleotide change in the DNA and RNA, like deletion mutations. The point mutation, which is caused due to loss or deletion of some portion or a single nucleotide pair in a triplet codon of a cistron or a gene, is called deletion mutation. Or insertion or addition mutations, the point mutations which occur due to addition of one or more extra nucleotides to a gene or cistron are called insertion mutations. And the mutations which arise from the insertion or deletion of individual nucleotides and cause the rest of the message downstream of the mutation to be read out of phase are called frameshift mutations. For substitution mutations and point mutations in which a nucleotide of a triplet is replaced by another nucleotide called substitution mutation. So when changes involving more than one nucleotide pair or entire genes, then such mutations are called gross mutations. And the gross mutations occur due to rearrangements of genes within the genome. It may be the rearrangement of genes may occur within a gene. Two mutations within the same functional gene can produce different effects depending on gene, whether they occur in the cis or the transposition. The rearrangement of gene may occur in number of genes per chromosome. If the numbers of gene replicas are non-equivalent on the homologous chromosomes, they may cause different types of phenotypic effects over the organisms. Due to the movement of a gene locus, a new type of phenotypes may be created, especially when the gene is relocated near heterochromatin. The movement of gene loci may take place due to the following method. Now, translocation movement of a gene may take place to a non-homologous chromosome and it's known as translocation. An inversion, the movement of a gene within the same chromosome, is called inversion. For phenotypic effects, there is morphological mutations or mutations that affect the outwardly visible properties of an organism. Lethal mutations affect the viability of an organism, and conditional mutations, mutant allele causes a mutant phenotype only in certain environments, called the restrictive condition. So in the permissive condition, the phenotype is no longer mutant. For example, Siamese cat, which has a mutant allele, causes albino phenotype at the restrictive temperature of most of the cat body, but not at the permissive temperature in the extremities where the body temperature is lower. Then biochemical mutations are mutations that may not be visible or affect a specific morphological characteristic, but may have a general effect on the ability to grow or proliferate, such as the bacterium E. coli does not require the amino acid tryptophan for growth because they can synthesize tryptophan. However, there are E. coli mutants that have mutations in the TRP genes. So these mutants are auxotrophic for tryptophan, and tryptophan must be added to the nutrient medium for growth. Right? If you talk about the magnitude of phenotypic effect, then we have dominant mutations. The mutations which have dominant phenotype, the expression are called dominant mutations. For example, in man, the mutation disease aniridia, or absence of iris of the eye, occurs due to a dominant mutant gene. Or recessive mutations, most types of mutations are recessive in nature and so they are not expressed phenotypically immediately. The phenotypic effect of mutations of a recessive gene is seen only after one or more generations, when the mutant gene is able to recombine with another similar recessive gene. Then we have isoalleles. Some mutations alter the phenotype of an organism so slightly that they can be detected only by special techniques. So mutant genes that give slightly modified phenotypes are called isoalleles. They produce identical phenotypes in homozygous or heterozygous combinations. Now, if we talk about loss of function mutation, it basically means inactivating mutations results in the gene product having less or no function, okay, being partially or wholly inactivated. Then we have gain of function mutations that are called activating mutations, right? They change the gene product such that its effects get stronger. Enhanced activation or even is superseded by different and abnormal function. Autosomal mutations occurs in autosomal chromosomes. Sex chromosome mutations occur in sex chromosomes. Now, the changes in the genome involving chromosome parts, whole chromosomes or whole chromosome sets, are called chromosome aberrations or chromosome mutations. And chromosome mutations are proved to be of great significance in applied biology, etc. Now, structural changes in chromosome, right? Loss, deletion, in which involves a loss of broken part of a chromosome. Addition, duplication, which involves addition of a part of a chromosome. Rotation of a group of genes 180 degree within a chromosome. Inversion, in which broken segment reattached to original segment in reverse order. An exchange of parts between chromosomes of different pairs. Translocation, in which the broken segment becomes attached to a non-homologous chromosome, resulting in new linkage relations. Okay. These are the different types of mutations: euploidy, polyploidy, autoploidy, allopolyploidy, aneuploidy, nullisomy, monosomy, trisomy, missense mutation we have already talked. So, euploidy basically involves the loss or gain of a whole chromosome set. The term euploidy designates genomes containing chromosomes that are multiples of some basic number. The euploids are those organisms which contain balanced set or sets of chromosomes in any number, and the number of chromosomes in a basic set is called a monoploid number. Those euploid types which which is the number of sets greater than 2 are called polyploid. This 1x is monoploid, 2x is diploid, and the polyploid types are 3x, 4x, 5x, 6x, and so on. Mutation due to euploidy refers to the state of having a chromosome number that is an exact multiple of a basic chromosome set. This means that the number of chromosome sets is increased in euploidy. Addition of one or more sets of chromosomes, there may be further autopolyploidy. So the autopolyploidy involves polyploidy in which the same basic set of chromosomes are multiplied. Allopolyploidy. The polyploidy results due to the doubling of chromosome number in a F1 hybrid, which is derived from the two distinctively different species. The resultant species is called an allopolyploid. An aneuploidy involves the loss or gain of a part of a chromosome set. It refers to a condition in which one or few chromosomes are added or deleted from the normal chromosome number. Hence, the number of chromosomes in aneuploidy can be greater or smaller than the number of chromosomes in the wild type. Various types of aneuploidy can be identified, such as nullisomy, monosomy, and trisomy. Nullisomy is basically 2n minus 2. It's the loss of both chromosomes of the homologous pair. This condition may be lethal in most organisms. Then we have monosomy, 2n minus 1, the loss of a single chromosome of the homologous pair. Then we have trisomy, the gain of an extra chromosome, 2n plus 1. Klinefelter syndrome and Down syndrome are examples of trisomy. We will discuss about missense mutation, basically the base chain that converts one codon into another. Many missense mutations are silent because the encoded amino acid remains the same, or the amino acid substitution is sufficiently subtle so as to not to compromise activity of the enzyme. Missense mutations that have a marked effect often lie in the active site or grossly disrupt protein folding. Nonsense mutation is a base chain that converts a codon within the coding sequence into a stop codon. So, though there's a limited set of sense codons that can be converted to a stop codon by a single base change. And nonsense mutations lead to a truncated protein product. Nonsense mutations that lie early in the gene sequence will completely inactivate the gene. And sometimes nonsense mutations that lie late in the gene sequence will not disturb gene function. Then we have frameshift mutations, the addition or deletion of a base or a basis such that the coding sequence is shifted out of register. Note that the addition or deletion of a multiple of base 3 bases does not cause a frameshift. After the frameshift mutation is encountered, missense codons will read out to the first stop codon. Like nonsense mutations, frameshift mutations usually lead to complete inactivation of the gene. So these are also all slides. You need to remember all of this. We have discussed this before. So coming back to the question that we started with, mutations could be directly eliminated from cells. It's partly true, partly false actually. So whatever you want to think about this. So anybody has any doubt regarding this question, you can ask me now. I'll wait for a few minutes. So that's what about all about that. So if you see, these are the radiation mutagenesis or the ionizing mutations, and then there are chemical mutations. We have talked about the frameshift mutation and the point mutation. We know about the central dogma. We have seen how frameshift mutation can affect the entire sequence of DNA. Substitution mutations can be both transition and transversion, where a nitrogenous base of a codon is replaced by another base, and it's called substitution. So they can be transition or transversion. And transition is basically when a purine base of a triplet codon is substituted by another purine base, or a pyrimidine base is substituted by another pyrimidine base. Okay, that is what a transition mutation. Whereas transversion is the substitution mutation when involves the substitution or replacement of a purine with a pyrimidine or vice versa. So then such type of substitution mutation is called transversion mutation. Transversion mutation. So if the purine gets substituted by pyrimidine and the pyrimidine also gets substituted by purine, basically difference in the nucleotide type. Okay, or there can be chemical mutagenesis. The test for mutagenic effects of chemical agents are almost as old as modern genetics, as we see. So they can be different types of chemical mutagens, copy errors by base analogs, and all of that. Direct effects on DNA agents modifying purines or pyrimidine include nitrous acid, hydroxylamine, etc. Okay. Certain fluorescent acridine dyes like proflavin and acridine orange causes mutations by insertion or deletion of bases. The acridines are planar molecules like purine bases and can be intercalated between the bases of the DNA helix. Okay, interaction resulting in addition of base. So these are all. So coming back to the question that we started with, if you have any doubts, you can ask me now or we can end today's class. Okay. So since there are no doubts in this question, we'll end today's session over here. And if you have more questions, you can talk to me via email. So thank you. This was the last session. I'll stop today's session.